You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Hello and welcome to a live Big Story podcast, and I'm your host Himmat. In today's live episode, we discuss the biggest headline of the day, which is Elon Musk acquiring Twitter. And yes, I am aware of the irony of discussing Twitter on Twitter, but only some days ago, Musk's bid to buy Twitter was thought to be a long shot, but his offer has now been accepted by the social media platform. The billionaire will now pay a cool $44 billion to take the company private. In a statement on Monday, Musk said that he wants to quote unquote make Twitter better than ever by enhancing the product with new features, making the algorithms open source to increase trust, defeating the spam bots, and authenticating all humans. The announcement also confirmed many of the details that had already been reported or tweeted about the transaction. But, however, it has also left many unanswered questions, most pertinently on how will a privately held Twitter operate. And is Elon Musk's idea of quote-unquote free speech right for a platform like Twitter? Joining us today to discuss all this is Apar Gupta, the Executive Director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. Apar, welcome back to the Big Story podcast. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Hi, I thank you so much for having me here. I put myself on mute earlier.
It's okay. So first, I wanted to get your views on Musk's idea of freedom of speech. He has said that, and I quote, free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. So, what do you have to say about this idea of free speech on Twitter? And is this the right thing also for the platform?
Uh, I, I wouldn't be the best person to comment on whether this is the right step for the platform, but the statement you just read out by itself, it's a little bit incoherent because the understanding that Mr. Musk has about free speech, firstly, it's not very well developed. He's essentially a business or a product person, he's an engineer. So I don't think so. He understands the full conception of the democratic doctrine of free speech. And I'll just share why. Firstly, he says that taking it private is one of the measures through which he can make sure and ensure that free speech remains free in a sense, right? Beyond the pressures from Wall Street or for investors. But by itself, it does not change the fundamental character of the entity being a business. It basically delists from a stock exchange, and the ownership then goes to a single individual. And we have seen in the past that newspapers or outlets which have been owned by individuals as opposed to being listed on the share markets by itself do not promise any higher value of free speech or insulation from political control.
But I also want to know, like, what are the ramifications of having such an open, no holds bound type of digital town square? Like, what there are now big questions also of Trump being invited back or being given back his account as well. So, what can one expect of like such a platform to be? Where Twitter is now such a safe space. What can be the ramifications of having such an open space now?
The ramifications which come through will be essentially driven by the business model, which we need to focus on. Now, Mr. Musk is not clearly saying whether he will change the fundamental character of Twitter, which is at present an ad company, essentially, where it makes sure that people can stay on for longer periods of time and it gathers their preferences, how they interact on the platform, and on the basis of which it serves the personality traits or the identification markers or the profile of a person to a marketer, and that marketer then sends you ads. So essentially, that's the core of the business model. Now, if you shift away from that business model, there'll be certain engineering choices which will be changing, and our experience of the platform changes by itself. And that also then has impacts on free speech and expression. For instance, the large degree of misinformation or fake news which is out there quite often is also because there is a high degree of emphasis on platforms to add users, right? So they may not be organic or real people by itself, right? They may be just spurring a greater degree of inauthentic activity or growth or etc. etc. and thereby padding up the numbers for advertisers. And Francis Hugin's complaints have shown it how this has happened in the Meta platform. Real engagement is substantially lower than artificial engagement to bots, etc. Now, how is Musk going to approach that issue? We have some insight, but is that free speech consistent? Well, he says that he wants to bring in real world identification, etc., which has terrible consequences actually for a larger free speech, given that such kind of identification will disadvantage vulnerable groups, minorities, or women who want to speak up on Me Too.
Now, I also want to know: is it now more worrying that a company like Twitter, which has a significant data set of private and public communications, and has both companies and governments on the platform, will now be owned by a private entity? Of all these data sets going to private hands?
I really don't know, because essentially you're tying so much to the personality of one individual and what they want to do, and they essentially through their public displays have inspired low levels of confidence in a very stable theoretical approach towards free expression, and they seem to be through their public statements approaching this much more from a ideological and a mission driven perspective, as I was hearing somebody else also say this in a recent media interaction, rather than a business perspective. So we don't know whether what will be the platform changes, what will be the business model, what is this free speech. But we do know that changes will be coming. The ownership has passed. Now, one thing which can possibly also happen, things can improve. That possibility is there. For instance, Elon Musk has said he wants to publicly release the algorithm which prioritizes speech on Twitter. So what you see, why you see it, will be open to a greater degree of uh, technical audit, public scrutiny. This is being supported by Jack Dorsey, the former CEO, and this is all good. But at the same point in time, there are some things which are very concerning about uh, the founders' track record, their companies. For instance, Tesla has fired an engineer in the past who was doing reviews of the autopilot features of the cars. They have a large plant which is in China, and you don't know how those business relationships may impact work on Twitter also. Uh, you also know that there is a large degree uh, um, of commercial development of SpaceX, which is happening all the time. And SpaceX has been a company which has come to define Elon Musk, in which there have been a large number of failures and experiments which have led to the success of today. Can we afford that same iterative cycle of failure, given that the number of people who are on the platform or who rely on it? These are questions. And I would say that we will not have clear answers, and we will need to come back after a year. I would not like to give any clear answers right now, and I would say what we can have possibly to some extent is some sense of change, some sense of things being contrary to our expectations, and let's see what happens. I would be surprised by anybody saying that A will happen or B will happen, and that actually happening after a year or two.
I want to know about your thoughts on Elon Musk's track record in terms of promises to his customers as well. He spoke a bit about Tesla as well, but when it comes to those kind of companies like Tesla or even Neuralink, which he is a executive at, we have seen some enormous number of delays in deliveries of the technology itself. So does this kind of track record also inspire confidence about his intentions with Twitter of making it open source and, as he says, a quote unquote digital town square?
I don't know what he means by this actually, because uh, a public town square will require a very different form of an entity to be there for it to be a public town square. By its very nature, it will be owned by a community rather than owned by an individual. So, in fact, it being listed, at least in theory, on the share markets is a much more accountable method, given that a company which is listed on the share market does need to follow certain regulatory requirements, which are in terms of investor disclosure, shareholder accurate information and disclosures to shareholders, not only with respect to a business, but also to activist shareholders who are seeking a board seat for a human rights expert, as has happened in Twitter, and Twitter has refused it. So there's greater degree of control. So in a sense, it's not a public town square. It's basically a billionaire who's saying that you can come and you can play in my amusement park, and I'm not going to charge you for the ticket.
Speaking about like the lessons or the failures, also, do you think Musk is also missing some of the fundamental lessons which Meta or even Twitter went through to become like the safe or the quote unquote safe and open platform it is today? Like there are some fundamental lessons or like signals that he's missing to.
See, let there are multiple ways how we can approach this. It can be with a sense of optimism. It can be with a sense of concern, cynicism. My basic sense about all of this is we are investing a lot in terms of our hopes, hinging it on the personality, hinging it on the tweets, hinging it on the press interactions of a single person. Are we really relying too much on an sole individual? And doesn't that put a larger question mark that that these platforms, whether they may be listed on the share markets, whether they may be owned by a private individual, we are vesting too much control of our public media into the power of individuals, either for profit or for their ideology. And that's the larger question. It shows a larger vacuum which is there in global public broadcast systems, which are required and could have been built through digital technologies. And I would say that yes, there's a large segment of people who admire Elon Musk for all the achievements he has made, and there's much to admire. But by itself, that should not lead to a degree of hero worship or kind of a reality distortion field in which we are not able to objectively analyze that Twitter is not only a product, Twitter is not only a company, Twitter is actually what Musk is saying, serving a larger, wider public function. So shouldn't such functions by itself originate from much more democratic institutions rather than individuals or purely through profit-seeking corporations?
Well, thank you, Pa. That was the end of my questions also. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And for our listeners, that's the end of the show. And if you like listening to this episode, please subscribe to the Big Story for episodic updates. And also tune in to the Quint's other podcast series as well, like Itni Sari Baatein, Kisse Kahaniyan, Land of a Billion, and Urdu Nama. You'll find them on the Quint's website or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.